Well, welcome back to another analysis behind the news. We kind of switch off from time to time between Bill and I, depending on what we're talking about. I want to talk this time a little bit about the demonstrations in the streets post-election. You know, democracy is a wonderful thing until the people don't vote the way you want them to vote. And so you have these people getting into the streets, and they're mad that somehow or another the election has been stolen because of the Electoral College instead of the majority of the vote, which we'll get into in just a brief moment. But you see them all out in the streets with signs like this, Stop Hate. These are, of course, constructed so that you can hit those people over the head who voted for Trump. It's sort of, it depends on how you hate, whether it's hate or not. And so you see people doing things that in our eyes, are hateful in the name of stopping hate. It makes no sense unless you, of course, understand the machinations of the left. The thing is that they say that Trump won the college, but that Hillary won the majority of the vote. Well, that is in question, simply because of these things. Does this include the dead people that voted? Does this include the illegal alien people that voted? Does this include the 60,000 felons that were forgiven just days before the election in Virginia so they could vote? You see, when you start to tally these things up, then you begin to realize, well, maybe Hillary did not get the majority. And then when you factor in fraud, I think that Trump probably had far more votes than were tallied. We do know that there were instances prior to the election in Texas, in Florida, and Pennsylvania, for sure, where people were filling in ballots, or ballots were miscounted in the early votes and that sort of thing, and for Hillary and not for Trump. Instances where ballots were being filled in for our servicemen overseas. And who knows what they were filling them in for in Florida. But at any rate, those sorts of things were there. Now, the reason that the Republicans and Trump are not making an issue of it is because he won. If he had, for instance, just barely lost, I'm sure you would see lawsuits appearing in several places across the country because of known voter fraud. But that sort of thing has died down now because Trump did win. You know, my uncle lived in Chicago, and he voted Republican his whole life until he died, and then he started to vote Democrat. And that may be a little bit of humor, but you don't see the Republicans committing fraud. You see the Democrats committing fraud, the leftists within the Democratic Party, not the honest Democrats. And see, they will accuse, the dishonest will accuse the Republicans of the very thing that they're doing. Just like the people in the streets, they will accuse others of the hate that they have, and so on and so forth. Now, there are three purposes of this violence in the streets. And that is, that first of all, you've got to give something to your minions to do after the election and the defeat. Because what usually happens is a depression sets in. A despondency. You don't want to do anything. You just give up and go and curl up under your blankets in bed. We lost. So you've got to give them something to do. And you've got to give them something to do, these things are coordinated. You know full well, if you just use your logic for a moment, that these spontaneous demonstrations are not spontaneous. They're organized. Oh, you can talk about Twitter and everything else, but somebody decides where they're going to meet, where they're going to march, and what time, and everything else. That's the way it is. Now, they may send things out on Twitter to beef up their people out in the streets, but somebody decides. And then when you see pre-printed signs in many of these cities, then you know that this is organized. And it's all being organized by the socialists and communists, ladies and gentlemen. You can find this out for yourself by doing a simple search online of all the pictures that you can find on Facebook and on YouTube and everything else of these demonstrations, and then go to their websites. So the minions have to be given something to do. And by the way, if you doubt that, for those of you who saw Hannity last night on Fox, you would have seen 3 people carrying flags in front of the demonstration going down the street. And I don't remember what particular city it was. But the 2 on either side of the middle flag were the Mexican flags, the Mexican flag. But the flag in the middle was a red flag with a hammer and sickle on it, marching right down in front of the demonstration. It's kind of a clue. And if you start spreading these photographs out on a table and looking at what's going on, you will see that coordination. At any rate, the American flag was burnt, all that sort of thing. These are un-American, anti-American demonstrations. And they're straight off the college campuses, by and large. This is where the cadres come for any communist revolution that's been done in modern times, is that the kids come off, the students come off the campuses, go out in the streets, whether it's our country or any other, whether it was Cuba, wherever it was. And so that's what's going on. So first is to keep them busy, give them something to do, to keep them together, keep them moving, keep the synergy going. The second is to put pressure on the new administration. Oh goodness, we're going to have to cut back on our promises to the voters because look at the violence in the streets. There's so many people opposed to what we're doing. There aren't so many people involved. They're organized leftists in the streets. They're not the average voter down the street. They're not the millions of people. They're the few thousands of people that are involved in all this. Then they make a ruckus, and so ABC, CBS, and NBC, and Fox, and everybody else goes out and shoots them. You know, why? Because, like they say, blood leads in headlines, and demonstrations lead, and so on and so forth. So, at any rate, so you put pressure on the government to do something or not to do something, and in this case, not to do something. They don't want to lose the advancements that were made under a very leftist government. And so third, the purpose of these things is to provide the excuse for more police power. In other words, as these demonstrators perform more and more disruption, more and more violence, and that sort of thing, then it overwhelms the local police, and what do? You call for the federal government to come in and help. And in some of these cities, Seattle and Philadelphia and New York and all that, I can be sure that these city governments are probably curtailing the ability of their own police departments to take care of these issues because they want federal power to come in, because these cities are run by leftists. That's the way they are. And in Seattle, there's no question that the communists run the city. In New York, there's no question that the communists run the city. They want federal control over the police on a national scale. And, of course, they're working locally. So that's the third purpose, is to create the condition for more draconian police power from the top down instead of local citizens controlling their local police. So, at any rate, what we have to remember is what's going on here and not allow our thinking to be overcome by it. Promises were made during the election, and those promises need to be kept. And so we need to apply pressure as well on the new administration to keep those promises. Until next time, we'll see you then.